Welcome everybody and to what is webinar 29 in a series between MHPN and Emerging Minds. This is the fifth season of webinars that we've run together, and we're really pleased tonight to be able to think a little bit about supporting children with higher weight, particularly around their mental health, which has become a really important issue for all practitioners really around Australia. Before we start, Emerging Minds and MHPN, we'd really like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land across Australia upon which our webinar presenters and participants are located. We wish to pay respect to the elders past, present and future for the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Indigenous Australia. So welcome. My name is Dan Moss, and as I said, I'm from Emerging Minds, and it's been a real pleasure over the last 5 years being able to provide you with these webinars with MHPN. And don't forget, we've got some great webinars coming up in the first half of 2023. I can't believe I'm saying that already, but anyway, here we are, and they're around supporting children who have disclosed trauma, a First Nations family violence course, webinar rather, and a bullying webinar. And please, for those of you who are interested to know a little bit more, please log on to our website at www.emergingminds.com.au/subscribe or sign up to the MHPN portal to know a little bit more about the webinar series. So we've got some great learning outcomes tonight, which came out to you in your information pack. So you're probably all over them. I'm not going to read them all out. But basically, really, we want to work with you tonight to identify strategies to talk to children really on in the piece about some of their concerns or some of their parenting concerns about mental health and about how being in higher weight categories might add to children's sense of negativity or stigma, and how we as professionals can address that with children and parents and make sure that we're providing really strong early intervention and prevention strategies for children's mental health. Slide, please. We've got an excellent panel for you tonight, all of whom have been really instrumental working with the Emerging Minds on the higher weight course, that e-learning course that is currently on our website and we're very proud of. And so first of all, tonight I want to welcome Amanda, who's worked really hard with us on some of our higher weight products. Welcome, Amanda. And just to ask you firstly, I'm really interested, can you just start by telling us a little bit about your relationship with your son?
Hi, Dan. Yes, so I have a really close relationship with my son. My son is 11 years old, so we enjoy spending time together. So some of our favourite things to do include going to the football field, kicking the ball, and we also like going for a walk together with the dog at the end of the night where we have a little bit of a chat about our day.
Great. Thanks, Amanda. Really looking forward to your presentation in a moment. Dr. Michaela Baulderstone is a general practitioner in South Australia who has a long history of working with children and families in really supportive ways. And Michaela, as a GP, what messages do you find are important in your conversations with families who describe their concerns about their child's weight?
Yeah, I think that's such a good question. The messages I'm most keen to get across is health, not weight. And I think you'll find that that will definitely be a theme in tonight's talk. And it's about whole health, body health, mind health, being able to socialise. So I'd say that's probably my key and favourite core message.
Thanks, Michaela. And Meg McClintock is a dietitian in rural New South Wales who has lots of experience in talking to families around children's health and holistic lifestyle. Meg, as a dietitian, how do you help families focus on a healthy and happy life for their child rather than just having a sole focus on weight?
Yeah, that's another great question. I mean, the first thing is often to really validate that their desire to focus on weight or their natural inclination to focus on weight is really understandable and often comes from a really place of positive intent. So that's where we start, with validating that. Then really trying to help understand that if we focus on weight, if we look at intentional weight loss as the goal, that we're actually likely to do a lot of harm. That's usually pretty quickly understood, particularly if the families themselves own larger bodies themselves and have had their own struggles. And so from then we can move into the alternative and the real benefits that can offer to their child right now, to their health and wellbeing, and into the future.
Great, thanks, Meg. Can't wait to hear you elaborate on that in a little bit. Thanks for that introduction to our panellists. We're now going to get into the formal presentations. And if you remember from your information packs, you were introduced to Tom. Tom is a young boy who's going through quite a lot of stigma and bullying at school about his weight. And Tom and his mum have accessed the GP and are talking to her about some of Tom's experiences. So fittingly, we're going to go to our lived experience person now, Amanda, so she can share a little bit about how she's supported her son. Over to you, Amanda.
Thanks, Dan. So, hi, everyone. As I've said, my name is Amanda and I have an 11-year-old son. So my son is physically active and he eats well most of the time, like any average child, except my child is of a higher weight. This impacts his mental health and our family. My son is aware his body is different to others his own age, and this impacts his confidence. It can be things like trying to keep up with others in cross country or getting wet and having his swimmers cling to him at the swimming carnival. Other children call him names, and the word fat is often the first name that they use. We use strategies at home, such as talking about strength and health rather than weight. We talk about food as fuel and that all bodies come in different shapes and sizes, regardless of our age. The school he attends engages in anti-bullying programs, and my son has strategies and people he can talk to at school regarding this. My son is conscious about what he eats. He participates in sport nearly all year round, and we walk our family dog most nights. Please do not assume we are an unhealthy family. Next slide, please. I did talk to our GP regarding my son's weight, as I was comparing him to other boys his own age, and I felt like I was failing him as a parent. My GP knows our family, therefore he knows our history and some of the challenges within our everyday life. The GP gently asked about my support networks, and I shared my time and financial restraints with him. He was respectful, supportive, empathetic, and most of all, reassuring. As practitioners, please do not judge us as parents. For us to work together, we need your support and understanding. We need you to listen to us and to hear us. Use questioning techniques such as tell me about and get to know our children, talk directly to them and make us feel like we're all on the same team. Our initial appointment with the GP started with the GP reviewing my son's medical history and sending him for a blood test. Our GP considered the medical perspectives as a starting point to address my son's concerns about his health, not my parenting abilities. He spoke with us about developmental milestones, including puberty, and casually offered us some information for me to take home and read. This helped me feel as though he was someone we could trust and he was someone that could help me. Next slide, please. We have since gone to the GP for other matters unrelated to my son's weight, such as his ingrown toenail or wart. On one of these visits, the GP asked when we were leaving if my son wanted to jump on the scales and check his weight. My son declined, and our GP was very quick to reassure him that saying no was perfectly fine. Since then, the GP has kept our appointments to what we are there for. He now usually asks at the end of the visit if there is anything else we require or if we would like to follow up with anything from our last appointment. This gives me the opening I need if I want to address certain topics again without feeling pressured. The process of working together and implementing ideas and strategies at home takes time. Next slide, please. Being a parent of a child with a higher weight comes with its own set of challenges. Often our children know they are of a higher weight compared to their friends, and this impacts their mental health, including how they see themselves. It develops insecurities, and they are often left feeling hurt or defensive. We as parents know our children are of a higher weight. We do not need to be told that they are, but this does not mean that we love them any less or we don't want the best for them. What we do need from practitioners as parents is respect, support, and reassurance. We are doing the best we can, and in order to do better and to help our children, we need your support and not your judgment. Last slide, please. As parents, we are often judging ourselves, and we're our own worst critic. I remember when I first went to see our GP. I thought about it for quite some time before making the initial appointment. I was scared of being judged by the GP and being blamed for my son's weight, even though I was there trying to help him. I was lucky that my GP never once made me feel inadequate as a parent. If he did, I'm not sure I would have gone back for any of the follow-up appointments. I felt so vulnerable during the process, and it took so much courage for me to talk to the GP about the topic. And that's the message I would like to leave all the practitioners with today, is please be kind and listen and support us. We as parents do not want to be judged, but we do want your help through your support and reassurance that we can do this together. Thank you. Back to you, Dan.
Thanks, Amanda. Well, really powerful messages and clear messages within that. Thank you so much. We're now going to move on to Dr. Michaela Baulderstone, who's going to talk about working with children with high weight from a GP's perspective.
Great. Thank you very much, Dan, and you too, Amanda. That was really, really excellent talking about the qualities and approaches we need in our health practitioners supporting kids with a higher weight. So from a GP perspective, I'm giving you a bit of a medical perspective. And while I'm talking about physical health, you can do that in a way that is mental health mindful and focus on language that is supportive, strengths-based, and allows for positive change rather than feeling bad about weight or even not talking about weight loss at all. So the first things first is to acknowledge we're talking about health for all populations, and we need to be clear that there are very normal genetic and physiological differences between individuals. So not just between individuals within a family, but also by your descent. So we all know a child of Maori descent will have a very different phenotype to a child of Southern Indian descent, and it's such that they actually have special growth charts. So the typical Western population Centre for Disease CDC charts are a Western population. South Indian families and even kids with Downs, they have their own specific growth charts, and what's healthy for one is not healthy for another. Next slide, please. So I think what we do need to do is really remember our language. Modern society is talking too much about weight, and when we see the impact on people with anorexia or eating disorders, this is really quite critical in ensuring the mental health of our children and a healthy psychological attitude to weight. And I've always thought there's lessons to be learnt from infant weight. Because parents are worried with their new baby, we have a sensible reduced focus on the numbers. I think we can learn from this and carry that same positive, sensitive language into the older years. And reflecting on the sort of stuff we say when a 6-month-old baby comes in, we say they're thriving, they're alert, they're active, they're reaching milestones, they're showing healthy development, they're tracking along the growth curve. We don't focus on a number. Next slide, please. So strength-based approach. How do you talk about health when a family comes in and might be implying or even saying, what does my child need to lose weight? Well, we never ever want a child to lose weight. They need to grow and steadily put on weight until adulthood. It's about the rate of that growth. So you change your language too. We want to keep those muscles strong so you can enjoy that time on the oval. Isn't it great you're playing netball at school? Netball's great for your brain and fitness. Keeping healthy will ensure you grow well. So I find you actually get better outcomes and people feel more confident to make changes at home towards their health if they're shifting their focus away from statistical norms or societal pressures. And we all know how dangerous those pressures are. So messages are healthy bodies come in all shapes and sizes. A healthy body is determined by what a body can do, not what it looks like. And being able to enjoy everyday life activities and stay healthy for life is what matters. Next slide, thanks. Now, of course, we have to acknowledge sometimes a high weight does need some help and intervention for long-term health. So children with a significantly high BMI do benefit from treatment. And if they cross a BMI greater than 95th centile, if we don't provide some intervention, we're actually leaving them to have long-term harm. So we do need to let parents know about that and offer treatment. And this can be done sensitively. And we talk about goals to gain, not weight to lose. Next slide, thanks. So this is the sort of language I use if I'm seeing a child who is officially BMI over the 95th centile, which is the definition for childhood obesity. We're looking after your heart by making sure your body gets the right sort of fuel in your foods, and that's about heart disease prevention. And if they have a BMI of that, they've usually had some blood tests, and they usually have a very high insulin, which makes them prone to type 2 diabetes. And there is an increasing surge in type 2 diabetes in teens and young adults. So we say, look, your body's working hard now, making extra insulin. Our goal is to improve your muscles or your exercise or even start a medication so you make the right amount of insulin. Similarly, those kids will have a condition called fatty liver. And we say, look, your liver's storing extra energy. At the moment, it has more than it needs. With exercise and just the right energy, your liver can work exactly right. So nowhere in that have we said you need to lose weight. Next slide, please. And this was a bonus slide that I just happened to be a patient I saw last week that I thought was a beautiful example. Now, key message, if there's one message I'd like everyone to take home with them today, is never, ever make an assessment of a child's health based on a single growth interaction. One visit, one set of height and weight, not okay. You need it over time. So if you look at this child, first growth, so she's 9.5 now. And if you saw her at her most recent visit, if you look at the very last graph there, she has a BMI much greater than the 95th centile, so would meet the criteria for childhood obesity. But if you look at the pattern over time, her height is tracking beautifully along the centile chart. Her weight over the last 18 months has actually stabilised, slightly going up. That is actually perfect. Slow increase in weight for a young child. We never, ever want them to lose weight. And look at that BMI. That is a beautiful slide. So if you see that child, you must always have multiple measurements, or you could do a great deal of harm saying, oh, gosh, you've got terrible obesity, and that would totally undo the amazing work that family has done towards health in that previous 18 months. And that's all from me. Thank you so much, Daniel.
Yeah, that's wonderful, Michaela, and such a great illustration of your point there with the growth chart. Thank you so much for that. Our third presenter tonight is our dietitian, Meg McClintock, and Meg's going to talk about focus on healthy weight and healthy lifestyle.
Alrighty. So I just want to also thank Amanda for her just really getting us in the mind of herself, but also her son. And I think that's really important because we need to consider the whole person, not just their body, but actually how they're interpreting the messages that they're getting and what that's meaning for them now and in the future. And so while, yes, we acknowledge there are, strong associations between higher weight and increased rates of chronic and complex disease, a lot of that is also worsened and impacted by the lived experience of being in a larger body in a culture that has really high levels of bias and stigma against higher weight kids or adults. So if we centre the problem for Tom as, your weight is a problem, the bullies have got a point, and to avoid bullying, you better change, we're actually really setting him up for lifelong struggle with his body and likely to make his physical and his emerging mental health concerns worse. So we have to be really careful with that. Next slide, please. And so what are we trying to be really careful of, or what are we aware of? And we're aware of struggling mental health, not just eating disorders, but of course, disordered eating, maladaptive eating, and really poor body image. And the pursuit of weight loss often actually results in an increased weight from baseline, and we'll talk a bit more on the next slide. So the things that really increase the risk of both eating disorders and a higher weight are intentional weight loss dieting, calorie control with the intention of weight loss, weight-based teasing. It's incredibly powerful, unfortunately, in a very negative way, especially if that's coming from within the family. And weight talk, body talk, diet talk, even if it's well intended or is supposed to be encouraging or supportive or educational, it can actually do a whole lot of harm. On the flip side, we've got some really positive things we can do. We can foster a healthy body image for kids and adults, so they are more resilient against our culture that is really strong on weight bias and weight stigma. Family meals is a thing that we can do, in the home as well. There's a lot of research around that being really supportive for kids. Physical health, reducing risk-taking behaviour, body image, and relationships, which is also really important. And what one of the things that can be done there, if there's a family and one child's in a larger body and the others aren't, by feeding them all the same, by allowing them all to have the same way of eating, we're not singling someone out and making them feel bad or feeling like they don't deserve yummy food because of their body. And so that can be a really powerful message of safety and of security, of you belong, we love you, and you're okay. Next slide, please. So this is what we're really trying to avoid for Tom, and this is the weight cycle. It may be the diet cycle, it might be really familiar to people in this room. It's pretty common. There's research that suggests that more than 50% of people, women in particular, are dieting at any one time. And so we sort of start over on the new diet plan or new weight loss plan. Perhaps a doctor's appointment has not gone well and there is a focus on weight. And so the family are like, all right, we need to put Tom on a diet. There's usually a sort of a last supper stage of, I don't know when I'm going to get to eat this food again, so I'm going to eat it all now. That can often be the kids who are repeatedly camped at the food table at the party, because at home they don't get access to those foods. And I better eat it now, even if my body's saying, oh, you're full, you've had enough. I better eat it now because I don't know when I'll get it again. There often is a stage where it feels really good. There's a stage, we can help or make people lose weight for around about 12 weeks. You'll find countless studies that go, oh, you can help people lose weight. Look at this study. But anything that goes for longer than 3 to 6 months, we actually see that it's temporary weight loss. But this stage feels good. There's lots of positive reinforcement. There can be comments like, I'm so proud of you. There can be, you're doing so well because of the change in body. And that's really risky, because the most likely outcome is that body is actually going to go back to where it was if it's done through that short-term intentional weight loss. So then there's a plateau. The body kind of knows it's on a budget, down-regulates things, also starts sending higher appetite hormones out to try to increase intake. So there's food preoccupation, increased heightened sense of smell around food, which is really difficult, particularly for a child. There's going to be cravings and frustration, and then it's over. The diet's over. Something's happened. Life's gone on. It's busy. We can't do that anymore. It's too hard. And then there's often reactive binging or overeating on the foods that were restricted, and feeling worse than we did before we started. Particularly body image is often worse at the end of the diet cycle than the beginning, and the weight comes back on, usually with interest. And for so long, the focus has been, well, we need to just find the right diet. We need to start again, and round and round and round the cycle people go. So we need to stop kids getting on this really early and going around and around for years. So what is our alternative? Next slide, please. One of the main things to remember when we're talking about weight loss and when people are trying to lose weight or recommending weight loss is that weight loss itself isn't a behaviour. It's not something you're doing. You're not doing weight loss. So we want to keep our recommendations really realistic and on behaviours, things that people can actually go and do. And these are things that are good for all kids of all body sizes and shapes. And what we want to really do is focus on, where do we want to go, not focusing on what we're trying to avoid, focusing on what we're adding in, not on what we're cutting out. So that can be things like fruit and vegetable intake. Some of these are really, obviously, really basic and probably come along with a weight-centric, with that sort of intentional weight loss view. But when it's done without that sort of side of weight talk and weight loss, it can be just a really positive thing that's likely to last for a lot longer. So looking at dietary quality and variety, looking at regulating appetite, and this is good for all kids, but it's really best for, people to be eating around about every 3 hours and making sure that their meals, there's all 3 macronutrients, and that's going to help with regulating appetite, regulating insulin, if that's part of the picture as well. And that's good for all kids, and just having those breaks in between eating where we just have water. Movement. Often, unfortunately, our cultural attitudes to larger bodies increase barriers to a lot of these behaviours, but particularly to movement. Not having a uniform that fits you says nothing says you don't belong here on this soccer field, like not having a uniform that fits. So really looking at engagement in movement, sleep, screen time, none of this will be a surprise. Really helping to understand and have a good relationship with this sort of non-core discretionary foods, so actually knowing how to handle them, because we're not going to be able to live in a world where they don't exist. We have to help our kids handle them. And teaching sort of safe and healthy distress tolerance strategies so kids don't lean into food as a main source of perhaps numbing out or tolerating distress that's going on in their life, because it's often a really accessible one for them. But if it's the only thing they've got, then that can, run into some trouble. So next slide, please. Obviously, this is, it can be really big. It can be really big. You need team effort. We need teachers. We need medical professionals, sports coaches, all these different people actually being involved and having that consistent message of all bodies are good bodies. Health promoting behaviours are good for all bodies. And really removing fear-based diet talk, being really sensitive way things are talked. So in Amanda's example, the conversation that included her son went really well, and that's great. It doesn't always go well. Sometimes it can lead to some really negative things later down, and kids remembering that through their own little lens and it not going well. So we have to be really careful. So sometimes it's better just to not have the kid in the room and have it as a really parent-led thing. As kids get older, you may be including them, again, through that sensitive and that non-weight loss focused language in that. The biggest thing we can do is to create environments where we don't tolerate weight-based teasing to the same degree that we don't accept other teasing. Unfortunately, our culture, if someone's being teased for their body size, our culture kind of says they've got a point. If you just lost weight, then you wouldn't. That wouldn't happen to you. And we have to be really careful that kids don't get that message from really well-intentioned parents, teachers, dietitians, doctors. So that's it. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Meg. And thanks to all 3 of our panellists. I'm sure everyone agrees they were, really great and clear presentations with lots to think about. So now we're going to move on to our question and answer part of our webinar. And don't forget that you can contribute by asking a question on the Ask a Question tab. So we'll try to get through now as many questions as we can. And Amanda, I want to start with you because Meg said something about, having, teachers and sports coach and parents all kind of connected through a broader support network who provides the child with consistent and supportive messages. How important has that been in your circumstances?
It's been really important. So obviously what children hear, they believe, and particularly if it's coming from a variety of people, it makes that message stronger. And I also really think that it is, I think as Meg touched on, it is very much a team effort that we need to work together. Like this message needs to come from everybody for the children to listen to it. And not only that, but I know as a parent that it helps me too, and it encourages me to stay on track as well. And it really does build that village for me to keep providing that message to my son.
Yeah, and it sounds like for you, Amanda, your GP was able to be part of that support network. A couple of questions here about when did you know, how did you know from an early stage that GP was someone who was going to be supportive of you and your son?
That's a really good question. So it was probably prior on other visits before I approached him about my son's weight. So when we'd gone there for, your normal run-of-the-mill things, he's got a sore ear, he's got a cough and this, reoccurring wart that never seemed to go away. And it was through those visits he actually took the time just to get to know us, remember our names, who we were, connect, the dots about previous visits as well. And he just, throughout our visits, slowed down and took an interest in us. Like, we weren't just, in and out, next person. And so that made me feel really comfortable with him. And then so I started to have this, thought in my mind that maybe it was time to go see a GP, and have this conversation about what I was worried about. And so as I said, it did take me some time to get that courage and go talk to him. And then when I did, it was because of all those pre-visits where I felt like I had that relationship with him and he was someone that I could ask. And I'm really glad that I did.
Yeah. And what difference did it make, do you think, just to kind of have that pressure taken off you of having a GP who wasn't going to judge you or wasn't going to kind of add to stigma?
It was unbelievably helpful. So I was genuinely scared. I thought it would almost be like a school child and I was going to go in there and get in trouble, or he would point his finger at me and say, all of these things. But it didn't happen. And it's been really good. And like I had said, so the first thing he did was looked at the medical history and we had conversations around that. At no point did he make me feel like I had failed as a parent. And instead, we worked through strategies and different ideas. And it hasn't been a rushed process. It was, let's try one strategy. Okay, how's that going? And then, maybe we could try this, or how are you feeling about this? It was never, do this or don't do that. Or it was a really good experience for me. And it continues to be as it's ongoing.
Great. Thanks so much, Amanda. So, Michaela, we've got a couple of questions in the chat here about your approach, and one from Sophie in particular. Would your approach be similar if children were really well above that 99th percentile? Do you want to talk to that for us?
Yeah. So, really the themes are exactly the same. Whether you're a child whose family are worried that, they're higher weight but not at high risk of chronic disease versus higher weight and are at very high risk of chronic disease, the aim we're after is healthy growth, and it's exactly the same model. And in fact, I think what we need to remember is kids who are a very high weight and at high risk of chronic disease don't need special, amazing, urgent, intense intervention. They need exactly the same support of a child who's a healthy higher weight, but with a longer term vision. It will take longer to support them. So that slide I showed you, that was 18 months of evolution for that family, but they're heading in a really amazing, healthy direction for the rest of her life. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it absolutely does. So I'm just wondering, Michaela, when children are in that category, that it becomes even more important just to be calm and not kind of adding to that panic for families.
Yeah, and not add to the burden of, families are already worried. We are quite well informed in modern society, too much so, and we just don't need to add to that. They know that, and usually in these families there is a generational effect because the child has that tendency. It hasn't come out of the blue. There's usually a parent or a grandparent who's been prone to type 2 diabetes. We have to remember that some families, epigenetics, we now know that multi-generational starvation in a grandparent can actually change the genes, and a child can have a highly efficient metabolism because of that. So, refugee families, children who are a third generation after our wars, there's a lot of that. So, they don't need that extra burden. They're usually well informed because there's a genetic tendency, or that the families come through hardship. And also, let's go back to that example of, say, third or fourth generation after being a prisoner of war or a refugee who's had starvation. To feed your family is actually a really important value over and above nutrition. And we need to keep that joy, keep that lovely gift they're able to give their family, but make sure it's for a healthy, long life.
Great. Thanks, Michaela. And Meg, for you, much of your conversation was around the kind of fear that children or parents might be feeling about the child's weight. What strategies do you use with a child or with a family who might be feeling a sense of hopelessness or even low motivation about a healthy lifestyle? You might just be on mute there, Meg.
Thought I wouldn't forget that. So, look, with focuses in particular, I think that often sets in when people have that belief that to be healthy, they have to shift from being in a larger body to being in a smaller body. And that's certainly not helped by our cultural messages around health and happiness. And so if they sort of believe that to be healthy and happy and, they have to end up in a smaller body, then that can be hopeless, particularly if things are going to take a really long time. Even if they are actually going to grow into having a not as high weight or, a healthy BMI or however you want to phrase it, it's not happening really quickly. And so we really need to help them understand that you can access that stuff now. You can access well-being and health and happiness and good relationships and, fitness and strength. And you can access that now. You don't have to wait on this sort of thin me dream or ideal that's somewhere in the future. And we actually need to be helping people access that right now. And I think same with low motivation, because often the low motivation comes when the expectation is weight loss and I'm doing all this stuff. I'm eating more veggies. I'm moving, I'm doing more steps, or I'm moving, I'm swimming, I'm doing all this, this health-promoting behaviours, but my weight isn't changing, and sort of feeling like it's not worth it unless the weight changes. And that's a way that we set people up to do short-term behaviour change, because if it doesn't get the expectation of, I thought I'd lose weight, they stop. So if we can not have that as the goal, not have that as the expectation in the first place, but have, these things are good because right now you feel good. You feel good in your body right now. You're going to sleep better. You're going to, be fitter. You're going to be able to get up the stairs or whatever it might be without huffing and puffing, whatever it might be. You can access that now. And that often helps that sort of motivation, because it's not about some future ideal. It's actually about, right now, what can I do to feel good today? What can I feel good to improve things for me or look after my body today? And that's much more motivating.
Yeah, I'm wondering if families and children are sometimes surprised when they come to a dietitian that this is your approach, that it's not all about kind of hopping on the scales and setting goals straight away.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, definitely. And look, things have shifted a lot, as we've sort of got more evidence around the traditional sort of pursuit of weight loss is not just ineffective, but actually has this whole host of harms that come along for the ride. There's been a shift away from that as well. So that, those beliefs around dietitians as the food police or dietitians as, the goal is weight loss are founded in fact, because that's where they've been for a really long time. And there's still a number, there's still a proportion of dietetics still practicing in that way, but there's been a definite shift away from that sort of centering of weight.
Yeah, and Meg, we've got a couple of comments in the chat about, really appreciating that strength-based and kind model that you've been talking about. And I also noticed that you talked about sometimes it's really important just to do a bit of kind of support of parents to kind of present in their conversations with you in ways which are going to be supportive to children and not kind of buy into that stigma. Can you tell us a little bit about how you do that?
Yeah, for sure. So I think we need to be really aware that often kids learn what's good and bad from the way we react to it. And so what I mean by that, if there's a little kid and they're out of the shops and they go, oh, look at that fat person. And then mum jumps and goes, oh, don't say that. Don't say that. They go, oh, that must be bad. And so having other ways of going, oh, yeah, that person has a big body. Bodies come in all shapes and sizes. All bodies are good bodies. People don't generally like it if you comment on their bodies, so we don't do that. If you've got questions about that, let's talk about it at home. Just being ready so we don't add to the idea that it must be terrible and that must be something I have to avoid and that's, horrible. So actually just helping that, just that understanding of not just sort of a denial that, if there's a kid who's in a larger body, we don't be in a denial that, oh, no, I don't have a big body. Or you might even, if they're saying, oh, they're calling me fat. If you're saying, no, you're not fat, to a child who is in a larger body, well, it's actually going to be really hard for them. What's much better is to be like, oh, what does fat mean to you? That's really interesting. What makes you think that? What do you think fat means? Does it mean anything? Like, is it negative? And actually having a really good conversation around it, because as much as we want to make the world safer for kids in larger bodies, it's not going to be for quite a long time. And so we need to change the world and make it safer and do stuff like this to do that and help build resilience as well. So when, unfortunately, inevitably these kids do experience weight bias or weight stigma, they don't internalise that and make them the problem. They're able to keep the problem in, where it belongs and get on with their life and being happy and being healthy.
Yeah, and you described times where that kind of stigma or societal expectation has contributed to some weight or some kind of eating disorders or issues for, quite young children. Is that something that you're seeing, at a regular rate?
Unfortunately, yes, it is certainly getting younger, and not necessarily sort of diagnosis of eating disorders, but certainly weight stigma and weight bias. There's some evidence that suggests that up to 70% of sort of preschool aged and primary aged kids think that their ideal body is smaller than their current body, and all they've got ahead of them is growing. Kids don't come out really hating their bodies. Unfortunately, they're taught that. And so we need to really protect them from the messages that they're going to get and really help them have that sort of those broad values about, what's valuable, what's important. So, yeah, we do see it a lot, unfortunately, younger, tiny little kids sometimes who don't want to go to school because they think their uniform makes them look fat. So it's not just, these messages aren't actually just harming the kids who are in larger bodies, although there's additional barriers and challenges for them. It's actually harming everybody because there's so many people who are afraid of gaining weight or think they should be losing weight when the weight is having zero impact on their actual physical health and doesn't need to be having an impact on their well-being.
Thanks, Meg. Michaela, question for you. Kath and others in the chat are talking about that, there still often can be expectations on professionals in different sectors to be thinking about BMI, in children, sometimes even as young as little toddlers or 2-year-olds. Can you tell me your approach to that and how you've kind of been able to do that in ways which are, hopefully helpful and supportive rather than stigmatising?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing to remember is BMI is not actually a really accurate indicator of a healthy child's growth. A normal BMI for a very small child is tiny, and if an adult had the same BMI, we'd be really worried about them. So BMI should only be considered in part of a pattern or a direction. And BMIs naturally fluctuate. So it's really normal for times of life where a child's weight to height ratio will go up and down. Really common for prepubescent boys to get quite stocky before they lay on a lot of muscle. It's really normal for young infants to be chubby. In fact, paediatricians are worried if an infant doesn't have, and in fact this is a thing in the textbooks, thigh folds and wrist creases. If they're not there, we're worried about their growth. And in fact, children who are too slender young are actually very likely to develop abnormal satiety changes in the hormones of their brain and actually set them up. So children with IUGR, intrauterine growth retardation, are actually much more likely to have unhealthy body weights such that that's impacting their liver, joints, heart later because of those changes. So back to BMI, don't over-focus on it. I think leave it aside. Height and weight are about the direction, not perfection, was a new quote I came up with a parent the other day, because it is about the direction the child's heading, not a set of numbers in the moment. So I'd even say growth is extremely important and should be done. We need a weight to calculate antibiotics, especially in this age of telehealth. Don't make a big deal of it. Did about 5 weights today, got them on the scales, and all I say is, brilliant, perfect, love your muscles, or let's see how tall you are. If I do see a child and in my head, quietly in my head, I think, oh, that's not going to be healthy long term. We might need to address this later. I do not say anything in that moment. I might then, if I'm really worried, ring the parent and talk to them in private and just say, oh, look, I noticed this. Where are you at? Would you like to look at it further? And that's for the where I'm really worried about things like about to develop type 2 diabetes level stuff. For the others, where you're not worried about immediate health problems, give it time, because they might just be at a moment in time, like that chart I showed you, see them 3 months later, and they're all evening out as they follow their genetic potential with just healthy diet and exercise, which you should check anyway. As you get to know the kid, what do you like? Oh, and you had a birthday party with a yummy birthday cake. It's great. And guess what they had for breakfast? When you check their tummy, you can get a feel for just lifestyle stuff in a very non-intrusive, normalising way.
Thanks, Michaela. It's lovely to see in the chat that people are talking about practices which are changing over time with maybe less of a focus on BMIs for young children. So that's great. Michaela, the impact of weight stigma or body size on children's mental health, is that something as a GP that you're seeing is increasing over time?
Yeah, and sadly more in the wanting to have smaller bodies. I was really quite saddened to see a reception-aged little girl who was completely normal growth and of a naturally slender build, came from a long line of slender genetics, who was worried she was fat, 5. And this was from a close group of friends. And this is where parents and adults need to be extremely careful about the language they use around children. Her best friend from ELC must have, little ears, absorbed like a sponge a conversation that she heard her own mother having about her tummy and being too fat and needing to lose weight. And she, in her little tiny, I know I wasn't there, I heard this fourth hand via, but these children had actually developed a focus. That little friendship group had become preoccupied with comparing their tummies, their little round, normal 5-year-old tummies, and had decided they were too fat. And and this was very sad. This child presented with, she noticed her brother had a flat tummy, 2-year-old brother. So from that moment, she was only going to eat the same exact mouthfuls of food her brother was eating. So she's sitting duck for an eating disorder because of exposure that people around that child's group, the adults, are exposing children too young to conversations that they don't have the brains to focus. So a developmentally appropriate conversation is something our society really needs to do better at. And I think we all need to be, I catch myself doing it. I'm saying all the right things when I'm at work, but I was born in the 70s. I'm enculturated to use language like, weight or size and things. It'll slip out of my mouth too. And you got to think, just be aware, don't be tough on yourself, and just reshape how you talk about things, especially in front of kids in this modern world.
Yeah, and of course there's lots of work being done in schools at the moment to be thinking about how they use language with children to kind of avoid weight stigma. Amanda, I'm interested in your experience in terms of some of the ways that your son's school have helped you and him to manage the effects of bullying, or the kinds of messages that they've been able to provide him.
Yes, thanks, Daniel. So my son's school, they've all been very fortunate where they quite often have a number of programs come through that focus on different areas. So my son, for instance, is a big fan of I can't remember the giraffe, Harold the giraffe. We've all seen him, the big orange guy. And they quite often come through and they'll do talks on healthy eating or different messages around wellbeing and taking care of yourself as well. So the school themselves have got a message about growth, how they speak to each other. They also have a student code of conduct, which they really enforce. And so when something happens or name calling occurs, my son actually has someone that he can go talk to at the school, and they'll have conversations around, his feelings, either how he made him feel, but they will often focus on the other person that has said those things, and focusing on that it's not okay to to say that about somebody else. And, words hurt, and they do have meaning, and they give him strategies about how he can respond to children when they say stuff to him. And so that's been really good. So now he's has that confidence to say something back to people when they say it to him. And it's actually quite interesting because we've had, I know the question was about school, but he's had adults say comments to him as well, where he's actually retaliated back to the adult and said, well, hang on, you're not perfect either. Or, that's not a nice thing to say to a child. And it really stops them and puts them in their place. And so that's been really good for him to have that confidence to be able to say it. And a lot of it has come from these different groups that have come through the school, and the school giving them the strategies as well to be able to stand up for themselves and to regulate that information as well.
Yeah, fantastic. And that's a really positive story. I suppose the more worrying stories have been, some of those kind of recounting from Michaela and Meg about children, at really young ages starting to feel worried about their body size or be affected by weight stigma. So, Amanda, what would you say to a parent who is starting to notice the effects of weight stigma on their children's mental health?
Yeah, so I'm really glad that this question has come up. So some of the things that I personally do is it starts with me. So I see myself as a role model for my son, and I have another child as well. So I'm very careful of what comes out of my mouth. And so I don't stand in front of a mirror and go, oh, I'm so fat, or anything like that. I just don't talk like that. And so, and obviously, that can take time as well, because generally as women, we all have this notion of we're supposed to look a certain way, where I don't buy into that. So I tend to narrate a lot of my life out loud for his benefit. So it could be things like we go out for dinner and I go, oh, I'm not going to have chips. I'm going to have a salad. I'm going to make a healthy choice. It could be things like asking for help. One of the things when we started this journey that I did as well is I started small and just, I know there's a MyGov campaign, or there used to be around, and it was called Swap It. And so that's where we started. So it was little things like, and this is a silly example, but so true, is that we used to have white rice for dinner. And so then I started to integrate brown rice to it. And then it was more brown than white. And now we just have brown rice completely. And no one complains. It was just this transition that happened. And same with the white bread to the brown bread. The lunchbox got less kind of snacky and more healthier. I started looking at labels that little bit more. So if I'm in a hurry and I do a quick shop and I can't read labels or things like that, I'll look at the ratings, like how many stars it has and stuff like that, and try to gauge the nutrition a little bit like that. But yeah, so one of the things too, I would say to parents as well, is to focus on your child, and building their self-esteem. So what are some of the things that they're really good at, and could that be extended upon? And it doesn't just have to be a health or a weight related thing, but my son is really good at maths. And so we use that, we talk about that to build his self-confidence, his self-esteem. And the other thing that I think is really important is involving him in this process, not giving him too much information, but definitely talking about how he can be involved. So, what does he think that healthy eating is? And what are some ideas that he thinks that we could implement at home? Or, what does he think is a healthy dinner or a healthy lunchbox? And then I go, oh, okay, great. We'll pop that on the shopping list. And then next time I go shopping, I'll pick it up. Or, making his lunchbox, I'll go, okay, well, can you grab at least one piece of fruit and, one healthy snack out of the drawer, and you pop that in your lunchbox? Or it could be too around exercise, but not saying it as, oh, we're going to do some exercise, but saying to him, well, what are some ideas that we could get moving more as a family? And so we've started walking our dog, well, we actually have been doing it for quite some time now. And so when we first started, he was actually a little bit focused on how many laps we could do around our block. And, then he wanted to timers and all this kind of stuff. And I was like, no, mate, we're not going to do that. We're just going to change the habit of when we have dinner, we're going to go, take the dog for a walk, and that's it. We're not going to count laps. We're not going to see how long it's for. We're just going to go out and have a walk, get the dog some exercise. And, initially when we started, it was a little bit of an effort. And now we actually quite look forward to it. Like the dog, hears that we're going or gets his lead and he's super excited. And my son's ready. And now when we go for a walk, we don't focus on how many laps or how long, but we actually talk about our day. Like, how was your day at work? Or, what happened at school today? And I hear the little dramas between the friends or what book that they're reading. And it's actually been a really good quality time where I've got to, learn a lot about him. And I know I've gone on a bit of a segue here, but I guess the moral of my story is that we don't focus on health. We do focus on health, but we don't focus on weight or numbers or throughout my journey with him, we've just been focusing on health and how can we create this healthy lifestyle. And it hasn't been overnight. It's literally just been one thing at a time and just reflecting on, how can I do better or how can we implement this, and listening to him and his ideas or his interests and just, slowly building this better life.
Thank you so much, Matt.
Sorry, Dan, I think that was a very long-winded answer.
It was a very excellent answer. So much practical information in there, and I think tips for practitioners and parents. So that was wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing.
I got a bit passionate there.
That's fantastic. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Meg, a lot of what you've talked about, and what all three of our panellists have talked beautifully about tonight, is these kind of taking the focus off weight, or what sometimes might be described as a weight neutral approach. Is there particularly evidence that you use that this is a good strategy for children?
Yeah, it's interesting because again, there's been doing a sort of weight-centric way of working for so long as a culture and as a dietetics medical profession. And so we've been trying that for a really long time. And so we have vast evidence about, this doesn't work and this does harm. And so, we've seen like much increases in sort of eating disorders and maladaptive eating and this sort of weight cycling with increased weight from baseline. So we have all this sort of risks of harm, which means we can actually sort of do like a side-by-side of, hey, let's do a weight centric with these kids and let's do a weight neutral, weight inclusive with these kids. There's stuff that's been happening a little bit in adults. And the evidence is really lovely around like measures of health and wellbeing. There's a great little program, or not little program, there's a program, Confident Body, Confident Kids, Confident Body, Confident Child, Melbourne, which showed just straightforward sort of nutrition education, which is always sort of rooted in that weight-centric way, compared to the Confident Body, Confident Child program, which talked about the sort of stuff we're talking about tonight, weight stigma, weight bias and body image, and understanding sort of that side of things, had higher like improvements in those wellbeing measures that the study looked at. And there's a whole website you can look on that. I forgot to put it in the resources, but you can find it at confidentbody.net, I think, but we can figure that out. So it's coming, but I think there's so much, and I know that, got to be careful with anecdote, but so much of what we are learning is from the kids who was tried on, who are now adults sitting in our consulting rooms with pretty terrible eating disorders or with really significant health problems because they haven't been able to engage in health promoting behaviours because of this sort of short-term weight cycling stuff. So we don't have beautiful studies. There's some, sort of population studies and sort of retrospective stuff showing that if you look at behaviours, a lot of the associations between higher weight and chronic and complex disease goes away once we're doing the behaviours. Just because someone's in a larger body doesn't mean they're definitely metabolically unhealthy, just like someone in a smaller body isn't definitely metabolically healthy. If we look at the behaviours, once people are engaging in health promoting behaviours, those associations go away. So someone in a higher weight who is, eating plenty of fruits and vegetables, moving, not smoking, drinking in moderation, has lower risks of morbidity and mortality than someone in a smaller body who's not engaging in those behaviours. And so that's, I guess, where we need to keep the focus in. What are we actually asking people to do and on those behaviours? It might look similar to what someone might be doing on weight-centric one, increasing fibre, all those sort of behaviours that I had. But when the intention is actually health and wellbeing and not weight loss, it lasts for a lot longer, and it has those double improvements around body image, weight stigma, and body dissatisfaction or satisfaction.
Thanks, Meg. And I suppose, that idea of weight stigma can generate for children feeling that they're kind of lazy or unhealthy or they're a bad kid for putting on weight.
Yeah, and I think on that, when we think about teachers in particular, so when we've looked at, who is really bad with weight stigma, it's usually, depending on the studies, it sort of comes out. Dietitians are pretty high, psychologists are pretty high, GPs are pretty high in general, not people here tonight. PE teachers are really high as well. And you get what you expect. And so if the people around have these internalized beliefs around bodies, that's going to come out. And so, again, the adults we listen to have horrendous stories of being in PE class and being singled out, treated badly. And that's going to destroy their relationship with exercise for the rest of their life. And so we have to be really careful about what is the impact of that weight stigma on kids in particular.
Yeah, thanks, Meg. Michaela, are you able to do some educating with children and families about that it's not always, similar for different children, that there are reasons why some children put on weight where other children don't?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And we often see kids I saw one only last week who was very overweight, as in unhealthily, so with a BMI much greater than 95th centile, and he actually had a restricted eating pattern in a 14-year-old. There's so many factors. So I guess we're talking about two groups here. There is the high weight that is a healthy child, and I think that's a take-home message I want to give today, and I think Meg's already referred to it. Your healthy body is what your body's able to do, and whatever weight you happen to be when at your best health is the weight you're meant to be. We need to flip things around that way. But then what happens is there are reasons why one child would actually eat very little and have an increasing body weight that is making them more likely to get chronic disease. And as Meg said, the behaviours. So this example of this 14-year-old, because he was restricting his diet during the day, was fatigued and then wasn't exercising and then was starving at night and would have large amounts of food in the evening and then was embarrassed to eat at school. So he had a vicious circle and basically had his body in a starvation syndrome. When we looked at what he actually did eat all day, it was a third of what I eat as a middle-aged woman. So so we're saying, look, you've got to start eating more, in his case, and as Meg was saying, spread out over the day. So what are we saying? So factors. So there's in an individual, their situation will change their metabolism. And it might be diet and exercise patterns. And then there's things like hormonal issues. So it's really important for children. There's conditions like Cushing's disease, thyroid disease that will cause a growth trajectory that doesn't look right that we need to address. Then there's the genetic tendency, as I talked about, with different racial, cultural groups. And then we have to remember the whole epigenetics side of it. And we actually have very large groups in Australia who are very likely to have very strong epigenetic impact. So if you look at grandparents of our current children, they have had nutritional deprivation. They have had very poor diets. Even smoking, smoking 2 or 3 generations ago was extremely normal. We know that granddaughters of a mother who smoked in pregnancy are at high risk of chronic disease, including they seem to have it's done something to their brain, differences in their satiety hormones. So we need to give people credit for stuff that's out of their control, and then that's why we shouldn't focus on a set weight. They have to they have to live with deal with the cards they were dealt and go for the healthiest body for them in the now. And I really like how Meg put it. You don't have to put off feeling happy and healthy and connected and enjoying life. And that was really well put, Meg. I loved listening to that.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. So we've tried to get through as many of your questions as we can tonight. And I'm sure, and we're getting some great feedback in the chat, and lots of people talking about, Amanda, your comments and how much they've enjoyed them as well. So that's really lovely. We're getting towards the end of tonight, though, and what I'd like to do now is just ask each of our panellists just for a final thought or observation for a couple of minutes each. So, Amanda, we might start with you if that's okay. Just struggling to hear you there, Amanda.
Sorry, is that better?
That's better, yes.
Sorry about that. So I guess my reason for doing this is I wanted to share my experience as a mum with my son and the journey that we have been on. And I have been extremely fortunate with my son's school, the GP, and the people around us supporting us in this journey. And I guess I just really want my final words or thoughts or for tonight to be for the practitioners. So when you have a family come and you can see the child is of a higher weight, or if you have a family come along and especially if they approach you about the subject, is just to really be kind, and that you don't know how much courage it took for them to come, how many barriers might be in place for them to have, this conversation, how scared they may feel about your judgment or things like that. And so I guess that's just the message I'd like to leave all the practitioners with is just to be kind and just to, to stop and to listen to hear what they're saying, acknowledge, their thoughts, but without that judgment, and just, kind of saying something like, that's okay, well, we can have a look at this together. And, either these are some ideas or, tell me more about you, or, but just definitely that being kind and listening and not that judgment, that working together. So that's the message I'd like to leave practitioners with tonight. Thank you, Dan.
Thanks, Amanda, for your contribution tonight. It's been wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
How about for you, Michaela?
Yeah, I was thinking, and actually my answers sort of crystallised in this very moment. As a practitioner, I just love everyone listening tonight to really embrace a growth mindset. When I reflect back on my training as a junior doctor, and if I looked at how I practiced 10 years ago, and that has certainly evolved a lot, very different focus. So I've learnt these things, these more helpful approaches by ears and eyes open, and always being open to new things. I'm not going to flog myself because I was very BMI and weight number focused 10 years ago, but as practitioners we grow, and being a bit kind to yourself and learning new ways. And look, even now, I notice with my own kids, I've had to mindfully, because of the generation I've grown up in, mindfully, it's not going to come naturally to me, change my language. So, we'll talk about, well, that's not good for your pancreas, rather than when I was a kid, it was, you'll make you fat. So this is a moving space, and things are going to change. We can only grow with it and keep doing the best we can with the new knowledge we have.
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. I think that's a really important point, isn't it? The practitioners are doing the best to evolve in a way which helps children's physical and mental health. So, yeah, thank you for that. Meg, for you.
Well, I want to steal Michaela's now, but she said it. I was like, oh, yeah, passionate approach. I like that. We need that, especially when we're learning stuff and reflection on our own practice. I was the same, trained in a weight-centric way, and it's been a shift. I think back to my early work and I go, oh, shit, I think I did harm there, which is not good. But I'm going to stick to what I was going to say, which is a bit of a metaphor. I learned to ride a bike when I was 39. It's pretty messy, but we got there. And I remember my brother was helping out saying, look at where you want to go, not at what you're trying to avoid. If you don't want to hit that tree, don't look at the tree, look at the path next to the tree. If you don't want to go in that gutter, don't look at the gutter, look at the path next to the gutter. And I think when it comes to weight concern, and particularly for kids, unfortunately, as a culture, we've been so focused on, don't get fat, don't want anybody, that's terrible, don't eat that, don't do this, don't do this, looking at all this that we don't want to do. And unfortunately, it heads us straight to the tree. So we want to look at where do we want to go. Look where we want to go for all bodies. We want kids who have got regulated appetites. We want variety. We want dietary quality. We want them moving. We want them sleeping well. We want them in good relationship with their body and good relationship with other people. And so really looking at, okay, where do we want to go? And then looking at, okay, what are the steps that we can take in that direction?
Thank you, Meg, and thanks so much to all of our panellists tonight. I'm sure you'll agree that they've provided such, clear messages around avoiding weight stigma and really practical solutions that we can all add to our practice. So thank you for participating tonight. We've had a really great time speaking with our three panellists. But before you log off, please ensure you complete the feedback survey. What you provide in these surveys really does help us get better at what we're able to provide you. Just to let you know that your statement of attendance will be emailed within 4 weeks. You'll receive an email with a link to the recording and resources associated with this webinar in the next few weeks. So you can share your feedback by the addresses which are available there for you, or by scanning the QR code there. Next slide, please. So for MHPN, please just be aware that the next webinar will be non-medical support and programs for older Australians, and that's on Tuesday the 6th of December at 7:15 Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. Again, there's some ways that you can share your feedback with us. Next slide, please. So just a word on MHPN. MHPN supports over 350 networks across the country where mental health practitioners meet either in person or online to discuss issues of local importance. Please visit www.mhpn.org.au to join your local network and bringing practitioners together with a shared interest in mental health. Please email networks@mhpn.com.au, and you'll get stepped through the process. Next slide, please. So this webinar was co-produced by MHPN and Emerging Minds for the Emerging Minds National Workforce Centre for Child Mental Health project. The Workforce Centre is funded by the Australian Government Department of Health under the National Support for Child and Youth Mental Health program. So thank you once again to our panellists, and for all of you for joining tonight. Once again, we've really appreciated your company. Slide, please.